The lights inside the Senate chamber flickered slightly as a storm raged beyond the marble pillars of the Capitol. Thunder cracked like the prelude to war, echoing through the rotunda. The wind howled as if warning the nation of something stirring not just outside, but within the halls of power. The storm wasn't just meteorological, it was political, personal, and about to erupt on the Senate floor. A low murmur spread across the room. The session had been tense from the outset, but everyone felt it. A collision was coming. Senator Mitt Romney sat tall, his frame rigid with the discipline of years spent navigating the weighty expectations of legacy, faith, and public service. His graying temples matched the color of the sky outside, and the creases in his brow hinted at more than age. They bore the strain of decades in the spotlight, striving always to balance reason with party loyalty. Romney had made enemies on both sides. His conscience had often kept him from falling into lockstep, but today something deeper nagged at him, fear, not of being wrong but of being irrelevant. Across the room, Representative Jasmine Crockett sat with her chin lifted, her eyes focused, unwavering. Her natural curls framed a face etched with poise and conviction. She wore a crimson blazer, not for fashion, but for symbolism. Red for passion, red for fire, red for every door she had kicked in with no invitation. Jasmine wasn't supposed to be here. Not in this chamber, not in this conversation, not in this much power. A former public defender from Dallas, she had carved her way through politics not by sweet-talking donors, but by fighting for people nobody else cared about. She had grown up in the Oak Cliff neighborhood, raised by a mother who worked 2 jobs and a grandfather who taught her to box when the boys on the block thought she was too soft. By the time she hit her 20s, Jasmine had already been arrested twice, not for breaking the law, but for protesting it. In her bones, she believed that the system could be bent, reshaped, not torn down but made honest. And now, sitting here under the cold stare of an establishment that often pretended to champion progress while clinging to power, she felt the moment tightening around her like a bowstring. The session was meant to address judicial reform, but the real firestorm began when the subject of qualifications came up. Romney stood slowly, his voice calm but carrying that polished Utah cadence that sounded equal parts grandfatherly and presidential. "I appreciate the passion that Representative Crockett brings to these discussions," he began, hands clasped behind his back. "But when it comes to experience in matters of constitutional law and precedent, we have to ask ourselves, do passion and protest suffice? Or do we rely on the tempered judgment that comes with years of navigating the intricacies of governance?" The words landed softly but with a sting. Jasmine felt the blow even through her blazer. The chamber grew quieter, cameras turned, phones began to buzz. On social media, the moment was already being dissected. But inside Jasmine, something cracked, not from anger, but from resolve. She rose slowly, not in defense, but in defiance of the premise. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor as she approached the center. A hush fell across the room like fog. Everyone turned. Her voice was quiet at first. "Senator Romney, you and I come from very different worlds." The storm outside gave a low rumble, as if listening. "You were born into a legacy, a son of a governor. You had the kind of upbringing where success wasn't just expected, it was scheduled. And that's not a criticism, it's a privilege. But don't confuse that kind of grooming with wisdom." The silence grew deeper. "I didn't come here on the back of a family name. I came here because every time the system told me to sit down, I stood up. Every time someone said, 'Let someone else speak for you,' I grabbed the mic. I've defended the voiceless in courtrooms where no one was watching. I've held mothers crying over evictions, fought to get kids their meals, and challenged corrupt cops in counties where doing so can get you killed." Her voice rose now, steady and clear. "You question my experience. My experience is carved into every scar I've earned fighting a system that was not built for people who look like me, or live like I did. My experience comes from the ground up, from the courtroom floor, the jailhouse doors, the protest lines. That's not passion, Senator. That's survival. A slow murmur of agreement swept through the chamber. Romney said nothing. He watched her, his mouth slightly open, as if words had escaped him. But Jasmine wasn't done. She turned, sweeping her eyes across the senators and representatives seated around her. "What keeps saying we want a government that reflects the people? But the moment someone brings lived experience instead of polished rhetoric, we call it inexperience. Well, maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe it's that this room isn't used to seeing truth walk in wearing heels and a Dallas zip code." There was no applause. Not yet. Just awe. Outside that day, the storm eventually passed. But inside it was just beginning. Over the following days, clips of Jasmine's speech went viral. Not just on news shows, but in churches, college classrooms, barbershops, and dinner tables. Her words hit a nerve. Not because they were flashy, but because they were true. Meanwhile, Romney found himself facing questions he hadn't expected. Internally, he wrestled with a quiet guilt, not for challenging Jasmine, but for doing so in a way that underestimated the very essence of what she brought. He began to reflect on his own path. The elite schools, the careful grooming, the way failure had never quite found him the way it had chased others, and something inside him shifted. In a moment unseen by cameras, he invited Jasmine to coffee. Away from reporters, just the two of them. She agreed. In a quiet corner of a Georgetown cafe, they talked for hours. About service, about fear, about what it means to lead. And slowly, the walls between them softened. Not erased, just understood. One of the subplots that blossomed in the wake of the confrontation was a push to bring public defenders more directly into the conversation around justice reform. Jasmine spearheaded the initiative, introducing legislation that required at least one public defender be present on any federal task force dealing with criminal justice policy. The bill, once seen as symbolic, passed with bipartisan support. Romney among those who helped shepherd it through the Senate. The second subplot took root in Jasmine's hometown. Inspired by her rising voice, a group of high school students in Oak Cliff formed a youth advocacy coalition called Ground Up. They began hosting community forums, pairing teens with lawyers, social workers, and politicians. Jasmine visited often, not as a guest, but as a mentor. Yet Jasmine's biggest struggle wasn't external, it was internal. As her profile rose, so did the expectations. She felt the pull between staying raw and becoming palatable. There were moments when she wondered if the very authenticity that brought her here would be the thing that got edited out. But each time she doubted, she remembered that day in the chamber, the silence, the clarity, the truth. In a reflective moment months later, she sat alone in her office, watching the sun set over the Capitol. Her assistant had left. The phones were finally quiet. She picked up a photo of her grandfather, the man who taught her how to throw a punch, but more importantly, how to take one. She smiled. The work was far from over. But for the first time, she felt not like an outsider clawing to be heard, but like someone who had cracked the glass and dared to speak through it. And that's the thing about experience. It doesn't always come with a rare summe. Sometimes it walks in without permission, demands the mic, and leaves the room forever changed. And sometimes it leaves even a man like Mitt Romney speechless.